您正在收看的是新西兰报中心之窗视点。
We know from our immigration data that around just over 20,000 New Zealanders, since the Trans-Tasman bubble was open, just over 20,000 New Zealanders have travelled to Australia and have not returned back to New Zealand. The spread of that varies across states. By far the three biggest states which account for the vast bulk of that are Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. Within New South Wales it sits at around 4,000 to 4,500 people. We have around just about 1,200 in our MIQ facilities at the moment, and we've got a few more still coming in over the next few days as we fill up the 1,000 rooms that were allocated for the first fortnight. We are getting more than one person per room on average, so we're getting a number of couples and families coming back. That allows us to accommodate more people within the rooms that we have available, and we'll keep going through that with New South Wales because they cannot return without coming through MIQ. But for everyone in the rest of Australia, we want them to come back in the next 7 days so that they don't have to go through MIQ. As the Prime Minister has indicated, MIQ is pretty full, and we're not going to have a lot of extra rooms available for people who are wanting to leave.
We have had over 130 cases reported today versus what is happening in Victoria. So the status of the outbreaks are vastly different, which is why we're asking for different responses for those New Zealanders who have been there. The threshold in New South Wales, given the fact that it is very clearly in the community, we're asking people to go into MIQ. For Victoria, it'll be a two-step process. Pre-departure testing and then a test once they've come back to New Zealand.
Cabinet met almost 24 hours ago now. Flights from Australia have been coming in all day. If the situation is bad enough to shut the bubble for 8 weeks, where was the urgency in informing the public?
Well, of course, what we've identified is that the risk is growing. So we've set clearly from midnight tonight, we will cease those flights. Cabinet made a decision yesterday afternoon, and then we have to notify airlines, airports, and put in place the arrangements to operationalise what will essentially be a shutdown for an 8-week period. So there is a bit of work to be done once Cabinet makes a decision. We received the advice yesterday, we moved on it immediately, we started implementing it, we've now announced it in the 7-day window for New Zealanders.
Have you not told the public before figuring out all of those logistics, at least telling people in Australia that they would need to come home?
Well, we need to make sure that at the point that someone, for instance, who may be affected contacts the airline or starts to make travel arrangements, that those airlines are prepared as well. So we do need to make sure that we have some things in place, but we received the advice yesterday, we made a decision in the afternoon, we worked to implement it, and then today announced, have it come into force this evening, and then that 7-day period for return. I would just say, when we have an immediate concern, we pause straight away. Here, we see the risk growing. So we're stopping the incoming flights for Australians, preparing to bring New Zealanders back, and then we're holding for 8 weeks.
Does this mean you don't trust Australia to contain outbreaks?
We don't trust COVID. You know, this is a virus that is incredibly tricky, and New Zealand has experienced that as well. What we have to acknowledge though is that Delta has made it that much more complicated, even for exceptionally skilled public health units. There is no judgment here. This is New Zealand just making a decision that's in the best interest, we believe, for us, but also the future of Trans-Tasman arrangements.
But clearly, given the comments of Dr. Bloomfield, you don't have faith in the measures that have been put in place by the states thus far to contain Delta.
Our view is that Delta does require both restrictions, but also robust contact tracing alongside that. That is not to say that we haven't had faith in the work that's been done, but there is very clearly a situation where Delta has managed to move through the community. But again, this is not a matter of judgment. We want Australia to succeed because it of course enables us to keep those arrangements alive. And we're absolutely willing for them to get back on top of this so that we can reopen in time.
Prime Minister, is New South Wales to blame for the slow handling of this? They let it get out of control.
Look, there's, you know, it's not my place or anyone here's place to make any judgments on something that we ourselves experienced and know how difficult COVID is. It is only for us to wish them the very best as they work to manage this Delta outbreak, but to make decisions that are of best interest of New Zealand.
Are you sure there will be enough flights for people to come in over the next 7 days? We're really looking at it.
I'll give Minister
a lot of flights.
He's been talking to Air New Zealand directly.
Yeah. Can I, first of all...
Shipping and shipping containers entering New Zealand and taking our export goods offshore, we need to make sure that we can continue to recrew. Otherwise, we run the risk that ships just will not come to New Zealand, and we have obligations there as well. So we do allow ships to come in. We have mechanisms to manage the risk there with anyone infected, and it's why we've been so strict on vaccine and infection control at our ports. When it comes to fishing crew, two different issues here. If a fishing crew is linked to New Zealand in some way, if they are processing in New Zealand, then of course we would treat them differently. If, however, they're a foreign flagged vessel that is fishing offshore New Zealand, has no connection to New Zealand, I'm asking for Crown Law advice as to whether or not we can remove their ability to recrew from New Zealand, because I see no need for us to take unnecessary risk for a foreign vessel where there is no benefit to New Zealand whatsoever. I'm still awaiting that advice. I sought it about 7 days ago, but we're working through that issue.
Prime Minister, full disclosure, one question for you and one for the Director General. For you, so given that there's this 2-month freeze on the Trans-Tasman bubble, what effect does that have on your timetable to make public some of your thoughts on broader border issues and relaxation of MIQ?
No change. We'll still be sticking to the timetable we've set around setting out that reconnection plan, bringing in the public health experts and advisors, particularly Professor David Skegg, to help share some of the advice we've been receiving. Because ultimately, the Trans-Tasman arrangement was one element of our reconnecting plan. We have to think about how we deal more broadly with other countries where COVID is more present.
And the data transport.
And has Australia's complications with its vaccine rollout lately played any part in this decision?
No, the quarantine-free travel arrangement was always based on New Zealand and Australia's existing status. It was never reliant on vaccine. It was the whole point that we both had strategies that enabled us to live COVID-free and to therefore travel safely. But it was always designed, if there were large-scale outbreaks, to have the ability to turn off that travel if it posed risk. Look, just back to Katie's question around public health in Australia, given it was referencing Dr. Bloomfield's response, so I will give him a chance to